This is Moral of the Story. Interesting people telling their favorite short stories and then breaking them down to understand what makes them so good. I'm your host, Max Czapowski. Today's guest is Delia Cohen, who was introduced to me as somebody whose philosophy, work, and impact takes your breath away. Cryptic intro, I'm in. I joined our call ready to learn, and she was a no-show. I thought to myself, really? We had this on the calendar and everything. What happened? When Delia got in touch later that day to apologize for missing our call, her excuse was that she was in prison and would I mind if we got another time on the calendar. In the blink of an eye, I went from frustrated to humbled, guilty, and extra intrigued. This was going to be good. So let's talk about Delia. She specializes in turning extraordinary ideas involving the arts, cutting-edge technology, and new media into reality. The common theme of her projects, they all attempt to make the world a better place. She ran the messaging department at the Clinton White House during impeachment and transition, helped organize the first and second Clinton Global Initiatives, produced Richard Avedon's last work, a photo essay on democracy for The New Yorker, rebranded Goldie Hawn's Education Foundation, managed Nokia's million-dollar global investment challenge, and pulled together in 15 months an extremely ambitious TED Prize project, a global film event called Pangea Day. For most people, that would be a lifetime of work. But for Delia, it was just the appetizer. Her main course, her magnum opus, would be on another level entirely. Delia's most interesting, challenging, and rewarding work has been in criminal justice reform. For the last decade, she's been leveraging her unique network of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, correctional leadership, activists, entertainers, and entrepreneurs to organize TEDx events in prisons around the United States. This is what she was working on when I joined our call, and this fact was a swift reminder for me to chill out, give people more grace, and apply the most generous interpretation of their actions. With Delia's guidance, incarcerated people, correctional officers, prison administrators, and community members collaboratively plan and curate each event. Following Brian Stevenson's call for advancing justice through proximity, half of the attendees are community leaders and half are incarcerated. As a side note, if you have not read Brian's book, Just Mercy, put it on your list immediately. Numerous attendees have found the experience unforgettable and transformative, spurring a wave of criminal justice activism and philanthropy. Shared on the TEDx YouTube channel, videos from the prison events have gone viral across the globe and comprise an unprecedented archive of authentic voices and ideas for criminal justice reform. When she's not working at a prison or meeting with high-level dignitaries, Delia retreats to her upstate New York 18th century Dutch colonial farmhouse where she lives with her dog, Buddy. Delia, welcome to the show. It is an honor to have you.
Thank you, Max. It is so wonderful to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
My pleasure. So you are here to tell us a story. Set the stage. Is there anything we need to know about this story before we get into it?
I guess it would help if everyone knew the difference between TED and TEDx. Do you know the difference?
Yes, TEDx are local community organized events, whereas TED is sort of the big organization. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So my story starts 4 years after TEDx went into practice. And so TEDx is the local franchise. It's independently organized TEDx or TED-like events organized by the community. And TED was surprised after 4 years of this TEDx experiment at how popular it had gotten. But they weren't sure exactly what the TEDx organizers were trying to achieve for social change with the platform. Like, why were they having these events? Basically, they had a website that was full of videos from the events, but they didn't know what the organizers were trying to do. So the head of TEDx, Laura Stein, hired me to look at who were these TEDx organizers around the world and what were they trying to accomplish for social change in their communities. With the idea being that if anything really resonated with TED, maybe they would help, implement some of these ideas. An example being there happened to be a robust TEDx community in some slums outside Nairobi, and the TEDx organizers did not have electricity. So IDEO, who's a lot of IDEO people go to TED, they designed a TEDx in a box kit for the TEDx organizer with no electricity. And Bill Gates and Melinda Gates and the Gates Foundation actually paid to have the kits distributed to TEDx organizers around the world without electricity. So I
Wow.
was looking for things like that. And I read a blog post that TED did and realized that 3 countries had held TEDx events in prisons. And I knew nothing about prisons. And this was the end of 2012. I'd never been in a prison, but I was thinking, who on earth in prison is watching TED Talks, let alone having events? Who's speaking? Who's attending? And Spain and Moldova had done little things. But then I get to the organizer of the prison event in the United States, and it's this college student in Ohio. And I email her to ask if we could set up a meeting. And she said, oh, but the 2 main organizers are incarcerated. Could we have a conference call at the prison? And I was very intrigued. And I said, of course we could. And so we had an hour-long conference call with the 2 male incarcerated organizers, their reentry supervisor, who was also on the phone, and this college student from Ohio State. And they explained to me that these 2 men had gotten addicted to TED Talks and found out that nearby Ohio State University, which was near the prison, had been having TEDx events there. So they found the organizer, this college student, and asked her if she would come over to the prison and help them figure out how to hold a TEDx event in the prison. And so they had done this. I think I was talking to them in January of 2013, and the previous September 2012, they'd had their first event. And they said they wanted it to show like a 360-degree view of the criminal justice system. So it would involve both incarcerated people as speakers as well as prison administrators. It would involve survivors of crime and law enforcement, and half of the audience would be outside community leaders and half would be incarcerated people from the prison. And so we had this fascinating call, and I got right off the phone and I was thinking, everybody in prison lies. This can't really have happened. And I went on YouTube and I looked, and sure enough, there was the former Attorney General of Ohio talking about how he had become a death penalty advocate in his life. And then there was an incarcerated guy talking about his journey. And then there was the head of corrections for the state of Ohio talking about something. And then there was a prisoner, and then there was the warden, and then there, was a prisoner doing a poem. And I just was like, this is amazing. And so this was January of 2013. In April of 2013, they were having their second TEDx event, and I was still working on this TED project. So I ended up, for work, going to prison for the first time to a TEDx event. And because I was from TED, they let me in first of all the guests. And so I walk into this room. It was the religious activities area. And I was surrounded by the sea of men wearing blue. And I just froze. I was like, where are the guards? This is scary.
Yeah.
And the incarcerated men were so welcoming and so nice. They were just lovely hosts, and they're like, hi, how are you, where have you traveled from today, and helped like move me out of the corner where I was frozen in the room. And that was the only time I was scared. The rest of the time I just was involved in incredible conversations, and I could not believe throughout the day, I mean, more than the talks, which were great, but I'd heard great talks before. It was the breaks, and it was interacting with so many men who were so interesting and who I was having such an enjoyable time talking to. And I had arranged with the prison to spend the next day at the prison as well after their day-long event, interviewing everybody from the head of security, because I was curious, what if a prisoner suddenly goes rogue on stage? Do you cut the mic, or what's your
Yeah.
security plan? And I was interviewing the warden, what made him feel comfortable doing this? How did they decide what outside guests to allow?
Yeah.
The incarcerated men, what were they getting out of it? And so I spent the whole day, and I just got more and more and more excited and inspired. And I thought, oh my gosh, this, like, to have authentic voices of people who live and work inside prison on something so established and globally recognized like the TED platform, that would be amazing. Why don't I, since we have a quarter of the world's prisoners in the United States, and these guys have this great idea, but they're incarcerated, why don't I try and spread their idea all around the United States to let other people have this opportunity that I have and I'm having and am so enjoying. And it was just like all these assumptions I had had about prison that I didn't even realize I'd made. I was being challenged right away. So anyway, I was absolutely excited and got in my rental car to go to the airport and fly home to San Francisco. And I was driving. My friend was sitting next to me. And then she did it. She Googled the names of the two incarcerated organizers to find out about their crimes. And of course, I have to say, I had been insanely curious the entire time I was there about what everyone had done to get there. And there was only one person that I'd actually spent enough time with over the 2 days who was kind of my guide. It wasn't one of the two organizers because they were so busy at the event, but it was this incarcerated man who seemed like a leader. Everybody seemed very respectful of him, and I guess he had started this great mentoring program. So he's the only one I discussed his crime with, and he told me that he had a drug dealer threaten his family and he killed the drug dealer, is what he told me about his crime. So anyway, there goes my friend, and she is Googling starting with the two incarcerated organizers. And it turns out, as the newspapers reported, one of them, when he was 17, either strangled or beat to death his 14-year-old girlfriend, hid the body, was from a very good background, from a well-to-do area. Nobody suspected him. He had Christmas dinner with her family while she was missing.
My God.
And it turned out he was caught, and he was reported to have just wanted to see what it was like to kill somebody.
Oh my God.
And then the other organizer was described as a sexual predator. And I was just shocked. And even so, she then Googled the guy who talked to me about his crime. And it turns out the drug dealer was a woman, which shocked me. I had just been picturing this male drug dealer,
Yep.
threatening his family, but he killed a woman drug dealer, and so I quickly was facing the realities of the people that I was, thinking I wanted to work with that had done horrific things. Anyway, I flew home completely crushed. I mean, I was in such a deep depression. I kind of went into my bedroom and just slept for 2 days. I had no one to talk to about this. I couldn't talk to the men who organized this. It was just awful. But fortunately, so I was living in Oakland, California at the time, and a nearby prison is San Quentin State Prison. And strangely enough, they were scheduled to have a TEDx event at that prison. And I'd gotten in touch with the organizer, and said that, I lived in the area and I'd love to help. And so she had gotten me able to go into San Quentin with her. So a couple days after I got back from this Ohio prison event, I went into San Quentin State Prison for the first time with her to meet with her TEDx group of incarcerated men. And I was telling them about my this is the second time I'm in prison, my second prison I've ever been in. And I told them about how shocked I was when I found out about the crimes, and how do you have a TEDx event where you build all this goodwill and then the outside guests go home and Google, and how do you stop them having the same reaction that I had and freaking out about the crimes? And so they said, well, those were particularly onerous crimes. And, I don't know. We were talking about it, and it was feeling very healing being there. And also on that first day, I was privileged to go to San Quentin has this wonderful program called the Victim Offenders Education Group, where they have incarcerated men meet in a circle for over a year, sometimes I think as much as 3 years. And they have not the victims of their own crimes, but they have people who were victims of crimes that are come in there and talk about how crimes have affected them, and they do all this work on themselves. And so they allowed me to sit in on a circle that first day I was in San Quentin. And I go into the room, and all the seats are taken except one next to this enormous black guy who is just glowering. And I was scared, but I sat next to him, and he was bald. His name was Curly. And anyway, again, being in this group of people, they quickly put me at ease. We went around and said how we were doing. We all checked in. And it turned out it was one of the guys was getting out. So it was his last time in the group. So they did a lot of like summing up, which was great for me to hear being a newcomer. Like one guy was in prison for vehicular manslaughter. So he was drunk driving and he killed somebody. And another one of the incarcerated people had had a family member killed by a drunk driver, and there had been a huge amount of tension between these two people, but gradually through the group they'd come to know each other and appreciate each other, and it helped heal some of their feelings. And then the exercise for the group was to read a letter that you write to your victim. And so, to my surprise, Curly stood up and he read this letter he wrote to the mother of the woman he killed. And it was one of the most moving things I've ever experienced in my life. Like, he pulled no punches in taking himself to task for killing this person and hurting his whole family. And it was the most vivid display of empathy I'd ever seen. Anyway, it was quite a first day at San Quentin, and I came back a little bit healed from the trauma of finding out the crimes of all those men from Ohio. And I decided what I wanted to do was see if I could get permission to have a dialogue with the two organizers, neither of whose crime I could begin to wrap my head around, being a sexual predator, killing your 14-year-old girlfriend just to see what it was like to kill somebody. So I talked to the warden of the prison and said, why I wanted to do this. I said, I really want to help spread this TEDx program in prisons, but what if everybody has the same experience as me? Can I have permission, if these guys will allow it, to talk about their crimes with them? And the warden said, sure, just promise me one thing. And I said, okay, what is it? And he's like, don't fall in love with them. And I said, I don't think that's what we have to be worried about at this point. So anyway, I wrote them an email and sent it to their reentry supervisor, who'd been on the call with the original call with me, and told them how how impressed I'd been with their work. The TEDx event was amazing, and that I was left the prison like brimming with possibilities about spreading their idea all over the place. And I said, and then it happened. My friend Googled you and
Yep.
read me about the crimes, and I explained, sexual predator and what I'd read about the other one. And I said, what's to stop everybody or in the audience from having these same, you know, reactions? Why should we care about people who've done such monstrous things? I said, I know it's none of my business and you might not want to do this, but would you be willing to have a dialogue with me about your crimes so I can try and work through this with you?
Mhm.
And they both said yes. So then I had to prepare for a phone call with them where I talk about, and I didn't know these guys at all because I barely spent any time with them at the event because they were so busy. And so I was researching like rape, rape in nature and all these things trying to prepare for this call. And I was so like apprehensive about it. And it was incredibly awkward. Um, So, I mean, I just felt like, who am I to be asking about this stuff? But they understood why I was doing it and they supported that. And frankly, they said they were surprised by my reaction because, like, no, they don't even, nobody, first of all, we're talking, over 20 years ago. I was looking at what had happened and been reported 20 years ago. And so, but it was incredibly painful and personal, and I felt like I was doing something wrong talking with them, but they clearly, believed in that they, really wanted the TEDx thing to be spread to other prisons because they thought it was having such a beneficial impact on them. So they went ahead with it, and we did a combination of calls and emails, and but at the same time we started working together because I was already planning on, like, I was working on their next event with them in which we invited Piper Kerman, who had never been to a men's prison, to come speak. And so we weren't just talking about their crimes, we were also starting to work on another event together and on a plan to spread this around. And eventually, like, I got to know them as colleagues. And although I never did fully understand exactly how they came to commit their crimes, that became much less important to me. And the working relationships that I had with them as who they were today was much more important to me. And the question about them 20 years before became less and less pressing.
I mean, it's certainly a testament to people's ability to change, right?
Hmm.
Um, what what I'm curious about is, pick either the Ohio prison or St. Quentin, but what was it like going into a prison for the first time? What went through your mind? What were you thinking? What were you feeling?
Honestly, it was pure fear the first time. I was just thinking, all these people have done horrible things. That's the thing in common that they have. They've all been
Hmm.
convicted of violent crimes, and I am now unprotected among a lot of people who've committed violent crimes. This is really, really scary. But as I said, it that didn't last very long at all because the minute I started talking to these men, and same in San Quentin, it's like these are just people. And these are really interesting people. And these are people who've done a lot of self reflection and are now
Hmm.
like the leaders of the prison. And I don't, I mean, the leaders of like rehabilitation, not the gang leaders of the prison. Those many of them had been the gang leaders of the prison and had left gangs. So, at both times in the Ohio prison and in San Quentin, I just found myself surrounded by really fascinating people. It,
Do you remember? Because how many of these talks have you done?
I think there's been about 23, and I've been involved to various degrees with them. So I've done about 12, I think, that I've been completely involved in.
Across how many prisons?
Oh, 12 prisons.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, do you remember a particular moment when you realized how much of an impact this was having on whether it's a prisoner or maybe even a prison guard or another employee at the prison? Do any moments come to mind where you realized, wow, this is really making a difference?
Um, yeah, in each of my events, I like to have one guard or corrections officer, as they're called, become like part of the group. And each time when that happens, it's amazing to see like the prison guard cheering for the prisoners who are talking and like fist bumping them as they come off the stage, which is just unheard of. In my last prison event, a guard and a prisoner actually took the stage together and talked about how they overcame their mutual, like the stereotypes of the other, to understand and work better with, the prisoner with the guard and the guard with the prisoner. And they just took turns talking, and they called it smooth days because it's in both of their interests to have smooth days and get along.
Interesting. And it
Yeah.
says so much about the impact that this program is having because, the Stanford prison experiment where they dressed up some kids as guards and some
Yep.
kids as inmates, and they had to cut it short because they got so into their roles. And that's an experiment, right? For these men, it is their daily existence. And so the path of least resistance, I mean, this is a cynical perspective on humanity, but the path of least resistance is for the guards to embrace that power. And I'm sure some of them do, or the correctional officers to embrace that power. And I'm sure some of them do, but the the approach that the guard took that took the stage with the prisoner, or the guy that was fist bumping the inmates as they came off the stage, that is the more difficult approach, I would think. And yet the events are allowing them to get their minds into that space where they can do that.
Yeah. I just thought of, I think maybe the most impactful thing. I did a TEDx event at San Quentin. The organizer dropped out and I ended up taking it over, and we did it in 2016. And Gavin Newsom was lieutenant governor at that point, and he came. His staff asked me what I wanted him to do, and I said, just attend. We have too many speakers. Could he just attend? And so he was totally pleased to attend. And with no speaking role or acknowledgement, 3 years later in 2019, he's the governor of California, and I get an email from him, and it was, Delia, just an FYI, I just decided to commute the sentence of one of the incarcerated speakers from TEDx San Quentin. Had I not met him at that event or heard his talk, it would have made a tough decision a lot more difficult. Just an FYI. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And the title of the guy's talk was, Am I Really a Violent Criminal? And he told his whole story, and he wanted people to rethink how they classified people as violent, because it was this tiny little Vietnamese guy whose nickname at San Quentin was the Professor. He was the farthest thing from, he had committed a violent crime kind of by accident. Anyway, I was so excited that when I got that email.
Oh, I mean, what a rewarding note that had to have made your year.
It made everything. It's like,
Yeah, I mean,
wow, if that can happen, that is just the coolest thing ever. We need to have all the parole board members, come to these events.
Totally. And that would help increase attendance among the inmates as well, I'm sure, if they know that this could,
Yeah.
This is a possibility. Now, I know that, California, not to get into the, criminal law too much, but I know that California has this really onerous 3 strikes law. And so a lot of a lot of the prisons are super crowded because there are, a lot of nonviolent offenders in these prisons. But there are still a number of violent offenders. And so having been in so many prisons and met so many people that are incarcerated for, in some cases, life, I'm sure. How has it changed your perspective on people's capacity for change?
Well, it's funny because, first of all, I thought TEDx was a terrible idea. I thought it was going to tank the brand. I thought there's no way we can entrust the brand to outsiders. And then if anybody had ever predicted that I would be doing TEDx events with people who'd committed violent crimes and were serving life sentences, I would have said, you are crazy. That is not a population I see myself wanting to work with.
Yeah.
But it turns out that people who've committed violent crimes and are serving life sentences are the leaders at each prison, because it could be as simple as they're not going to get out unless the parole board lets them out, so they have to take certain programs in order to show that they're changing. And even if they're just taking them so they can get out, education is transformative. And once you start taking these programs, the education, you can catch the education fever and completely grow intellectually and change. So the people that are most rehabilitated in each prison are those serving life sentences for violent crimes, who've been in for a long time, have taken lots of programs, done lots of work, are changing, and all they want to do is help young people avoid making the mistakes that they made. So often when they go out into the world, that's what they work on. Mentoring youth, which is wonderful. And because they're so authoritative, having done crime, spent decades in prison, so they can have a tremendous impact.
What about lifers without the possibility of parole? Do you see any difference there?
Nope. The difference is that sometimes those people aren't eligible for programs because people feel like it's a waste if there's limited resources, to give people who are never getting out the benefits of an education, which I feel is completely wrong.
Yeah.
And I would like to do away with life without the possibility of parole. I think everybody should have the possibility of parole and the idea that they can change. Governor Newsom and the parole board just let out, I'm blanking on her name, but one of the Manson women, she just got out after serving 50 years, and the parole board had found her no longer a threat to society, but every governor including Newsom, kept taking it away, rejecting her parole, and he finally let her out. And, the idea is that you're no longer a threat to society, and you've served your time, you've paid your dues. But really, people are all about punishment, and it's not about they're really afraid of letting these people out in society. They just want them to continue to be punished, which is very expensive.
incredibly expensive, and letting them out, it's really challenging. The longer an inmate is in prison, the more challenging it is for them to reacclimate to, not having every part of your day planned out and having this freedom. And from what I've read, that is a factor in some of them sort of relapsing, so to speak, because if you've been in prison for 50 years, the world has changed entirely, and you don't really have a memory of what it's like to have complete actual freedom.
Right.
And then you start to worry about things that you never had to worry about, like how am I going to pay for my next meal? Where am I going to sleep?
Yep.
It feels like that's a real challenge.
It is a real challenge, but the recidivism rate for people serving life sentences is very, very small. It's people rotate through when they have determinate sentences and they just get out, whether or not they just go on the yard and smoke pot, every single day. They don't have to do anything to get out. Those are the people that keep cycling through.
I see. Are the events live streamed at all?
Never have been. Though I was just in California this year and they talked about doing that, which is super exciting.
Exciting. Also kind of risky.
Yeah, in the decade that I've been doing this, there's never been one prisoner who's gone rogue. In fact, the only time we ever had to edit a talk, it was a outsider who was quoting a statistic about the Department of Corrections, and they said they had the wrong number. So
you mentioned when you entered that first the first room that was packed, and you sat next to
Curly.
Curly. How you mentioned the room was packed. How do they select what inmates attend the talks?
Each prison does that differently. Sometimes they do it like TED does, where you have to write an essay and say why you want to be part of this event. Sometimes they just open it up to people just putting their names in, first come, first served. Sometimes they do it by, like, if there are a lot of different groups, they'll just take some of the groups, people that have been doing work. Sometimes they'll have younger prisoners in among the population, so they'll try and have some younger prisoners that can use it as like a good example of something to strive for. It changes at each place.
Interesting. Interesting. Let me ask you this. So as you think about the story that you told, what would you say is the moral of that story?
I think it's a couple of things. I think the moral of the story to me is that there are no simply good or bad people. People can do monstrous things, but that does not mean that they are monsters. And that does not mean that that's all they are through their whole life. And Brian Stevenson, who we both love, he says he believes that when somebody's a killer, they're not just a killer. When somebody steals something, they're not just a thief. And I totally believe that. And that's why I was able to get over my problem with the two guys' crimes, because our relationship became so multidimensional, and like I didn't have to fixate on this thing that I read that did not encapsulate all the trauma that they both went through growing up, and that contributed to them being able to do those crimes. And as I became more friendly with those two guys, I did learn really intimate things about their lives and their pasts, and could kind of understand how they came to commit those crimes, which I couldn't imagine being able to understand before.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of the trauma that they went through. And it's a common refrain, obviously, with a lot of people that commit violent crimes. It almost makes me feel like their parents or their caretakers, guardians, whatever the case might be, should be held criminally responsible, at least partially contributory negligence with respect to what they've created out of
Right.
this, human that at the time, right? Maybe not now, but
Hmm.
it just makes me feel like some of the blame should rest with some of those caretakers.
Yeah, a lot of prisoners are were in foster care. I would say that, I mean, what I've noticed from working for a decade in our prisons is that it's an incredibly racist system. Almost
Hmm.
all the prisoners are black or brown. It's so disproportionately, it's unbelievable. And most of them are from impoverished backgrounds.
Hmm.
It's and there's so much trauma. I spent my first year, honestly, working in the prisons. Every time I was driving home from the prison the first year, I think I just wept because I just was full of so much trauma of from what I'd been hearing like all day long. And also, it's unnatural to see human beings, and then coming to care about human beings living in cages.
Yeah.
It's really hard to assimilate that. I
Hmm.
don't know how corrections officers can deal with their jobs. I mean, corrections officers have one of the highest suicide rates, if not the highest, of any profession in the United States. It's unbelievably hard to do that. And where I'm from in upstate New York, there are a lot of prisons. And so it's a
Hmm.
common thing for people to be prison guards, and it's a super hard job.
I mean, you just have to be incredibly emotionally calloused, I would think, because
Hmm.
if you can't be numb to what you're seeing every day,
Yeah.
you can't really
Right.
do your job.
Right. And I have to say, I became more emotionally calloused. I do not cry on the way home from prison anymore. But that first year was really tough. And I was thinking I need to learn Reiki or something because I'm getting all this trauma from other people, like stuck in my own body. It was just so hard. But I also find that prison is the most optimistic place I've ever been because
Hmm.
if in this horrible, horrible place people are transforming and becoming better people, it just makes you think that anything can be possible. The talk that has gotten like on TED's YouTube channel, TEDx's YouTube channel, on TED.com. It has over 10 million views. The most popular of my prison talks. The
Hmm.
title of it is How I Learned to Read and Trade Stocks in Prison.
Oh,
And
I've
it's
heard of
this
it.
great story.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a testament to the power of the human spirit, right?
It is.
If nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, do some of these inmates know that their talks are going viral?
Oh, yeah, like this guy Wall Street who did the talk I was just referencing.
Yeah,
He got letters from all over the world from people. So,
that's
yes, they
wild.
do.
So, having been at the Clinton White House during some fairly tumultuous times, you had to hone your storytelling skills. Have you found yourself using or leveraging any of that experience in some of this work that you've been doing?
Absolutely. I am the speaker coach for all of these events. So, for the outside speakers as well as the, incarcerated speakers and the staff. So, constantly giving advice about storytelling and how to think about your audience, how to segment your audience into, who's going to be cheering you on, who has the power to make your idea happen, who's going to be putting up roadblocks, and like naming all those different segments, and then making sure that you're addressing each of those segments in your talk.
That's fascinating. So, talk a little bit more about that. What are some of the most impactful tips on storytelling that you've been sharing with some of these inmates?
Well, let's see. I talk about like there's something called a star moment where Bill Gates did this once. He was at TED, and he was talking about malaria, and everybody, including me, was kind of nodding off, and it just wasn't relevant. So he reaches down and he takes this glass jar of mosquitoes. And he's like, why should people in Africa be the only ones worried about this? And he opens it up and lets the mosquitoes out. And there's this like huge gasp in the audience. And he's like, of course, those weren't malaria infected mosquitoes. But like, all of a sudden, we were all paying attention
Oh,
to
yeah.
him. So that was one thing. And then Brian Stevenson did something amazing. He made TED is still it's changing, but it's still mostly like a white elite male
Hmm.
conference. And back when Brian Stevenson gave his talk, more so. But he found a way to make the plight of poor black and brown incarcerated people relevant to white people. He did it in a number of ways, but one thing he did was he told a story about how he was in Germany giving a lecture about the death penalty in America. And he says this woman from Germany comes up to him afterwards and says, what you're saying is so upsetting. We could never have the death penalty in Germany with our history. I mean, it just never could be. And Brian Stevenson said, yeah, imagine if Germany had the death penalty today and was disproportionately executing Jews. It would be unconscionable. It'd be unbearable. But yet America, with its legacy of slavery, is doing just that, disproportionately executing black Americans. And somehow there's this disconnect and we don't talk about it. And just by doing that one, like, completely new comparison to the Holocaust, was able to like make this story more relevant to all the Jewish people in the audience.
Hmm.
So again, I think my biggest tip is audience segmentation. Who has the power to help make your idea possible? Who has the power to hinder it? Let's label those groups and then identify their objections and try and help like get them over those hurdles so they will adopt your idea.
And you really have to do a lot of homework on that because it's not like they're going to voice their objections to you. You just have to assume based on your segmentation exercise that you know what those objections are and build the, the responses to those objections into the talk smoothly.
Exactly. Yep. So,
Fascinating. Fascinating. Um, the
so I
last
guess,
couple of questions.
okay.
Go ahead.
I
No,
was
go
going to
ahead.
say the other, you asked about the moral of the story, and I was saying that it's about there are no good or bad people. There are just people can do good and bad things, and I feel like we all have an infinite capacity to do bad and good.
Hmm.
But I think the other side of it is judgment, is that we judge people.
Yeah.
We judge people so quickly. And for instance, now, having worked in prisons for a decade, I know that if I were going to hire somebody coming out of a prison, I would want it to be somebody who served a life sentence. Like now, my judgment's going to be different than other people's because I know more about this population. But why I want all people to come to my prison events is I want them to meet these people, and it is transformative in that you're all of a sudden realize you just spent a day with people who've killed other people,
Yeah.
and you really found them intelligent and entertaining and inspiring, and you just wouldn't think that that would be possible, but it absolutely is, and it happens at every single event.
And it really messes with your worldview.
It does.
Yeah.
I I told you I didn't like the idea of TEDx, and why I'd want to devote time to people who've done bad things when you could be helping children or something.
Yeah.
It's not something I planned on, but I stumbled upon this world and then was like, oh my God, it's nothing like I thought it would be. And we have a real problem in this country with over incarceration and the racism of it all. And I just feel so privileged. I feel like an ambassador to an invisible country and
Hmm.
I want to bring all the people that I love, and everybody of any influence into this world to see what it's really truly like, not like the movies.
Yeah, can only imagine. Um, does every story have to have a moral?
I don't think so. Do you?
Nobody's ever asked me that before. I think that I think that every story has a moral, even if it's not explicit.
Oh, okay.
So there could be a story that's just told for entertainment purposes,
Mm-hmm.
but I still think that if you really think about that story, you'll find a moral in there.
Hmm.
What do you think?
Maybe you're right. I don't know. I don't know. What I like about, um, or what I think is compelling about the prison stories is that prison in its nature and its very nature is isolating and hiding. It's removing people from society. So I think that's where this fascination in America for true crime stories and anything about prison stems from, because it's an unknown world that most people don't get a glimpse of. So I think that the stories from prison are so popular because it's a glimpse into a world that they can't see, that's
Absolutely.
hidden from them purposefully.
Purposefully. Exactly. Um, well, last question. If you could say one thing to your 20-year-old self, any one thing, what would it be?
Hmm. That's a tough one. Just keep going, keep experiencing. Life's never going to be boring. I don't know. I've done so many different things in my life.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I have anything of great value to impart, but um, I like the way that I've tried many, many different things. And I mean, the hardest thing that I ever did was leaving the country and traveling around the world,
Hmm.
on $1,000 round the world ticket for 3 years, way before there was email or cell phones, and Americans, the economy wasn't even globalized back then. But so just keep going.
Actually, that is highly underrated advice because when people are younger, there's a lot more uncertainty.
Hmm.
And for many people, there is a lot more sensitivity to that uncertainty. And so, simple advice like just keep going. I have a lot of people give that same answer because it's valid.
Okay, good.
Yeah, not that you need the validation from me, but it is a great answer. Well, that does it. Delia Cohen, criminal justice activist, organizer, and architect of Platforms for Change. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Max.
For show notes and more, head over to mosspod.org. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast on. This was Moral of the Story. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.